In a recent, ultra-long video, we took you on a journey through the Slice, one of the largest and most important parts of the Star Wars galaxy, overviewing the entire region in exhaustive detail. But the Slice wasn't the only region of the galaxy, and in this video, we're going to be performing a similar overview of a smaller but similarly important one, the Arrowhead. Also known as the Inner Core, the Arrowhead was essentially the core world's portion of the Slice, but it was typically treated as a separate region due to its unique history and legacy. The Arrowhead was the wealthiest and most densely populated part of the galaxy, the heart of the core worlds, and the birthplace of the Republic, and in this video, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the entire region.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Before we begin, the ground rules for our tour of the Arrowhead will largely be the same as those we used for our tour of the Slice. We're not going to mention every single system in the Arrowhead by name, though we did make a complete list during the making of this video. We will, however, at least mention all the interesting systems, as well as trade routes, the relationships between various Arrowhead civilizations, and also how the regions fared during the Clone Wars. With that out of the way, let's get into things. The core worlds were renowned as the bright center of the galaxy. The densely populated and decadently wealthy systems clustered around the Republic's heart. But the core worlds weren't uniformly wealthy and prominent. There were actually parts of the core worlds that were as obscure as some parts of the Rim. The popular conception of the core worlds most accurately describes the Arrowhead, the Inner Core, the part of the galaxy where the Republic was founded. This was the part of the core between the Corellian Run and the Polemian trade route, plus a small strip of systems between the Corellian Run and the borders of the Deep Core. In other words, this region was the coreward tip of the Slice, but it was culturally and historically distinct from that region, whose many systems were largely explored and settled by colonists striking out from the Arrowhead. The exploration and settlement of the Arrowhead began before the dawn of the Republic, when the humans of Coruscant began sending out sleeper ships to establish colonies during the time of the Infinite Empire. Beginning in 27,500 BBY and continuing for the next 2,000 years, humanity spread to dozens of systems all across the eastern arc of the core worlds. In this age, before the hyperdrive, when space travel was so slow that crews and colonists froze themselves in carbonite to wait out their years-long journeys, contact between the various human worlds in the core was rare, and as a result, the many colonies of Coruscant became independent, developing cultures and founding colonies of their own. In this manner, a great number of diverse human civilizations sprang up across a region of space that one Duros hyperspatial physicist later named the Tetrahedron, a pyramid of space between Coruscant, Alderaan, Corellia, and the Jin Jump, a location high above the galactic plane. After the fall of the Infinite Empire, these human civilizations, plus a few neighboring non-human ones, became part of a loose network of core world states known to historians as the Human Core. In 25,053 BBY, after the invention of the modern hyperdrive, these peoples banded together to form a new interstellar government based on Coruscant, the Galactic Republic. Hyperspace travel opened up the whole galaxy to Republic explorers, and before long, this Republic, which started as little more than a loose confederation based on trade and mutual protection, became a galaxy-spanning empire, colonizing a vast tract of space. But even as the Republic grew and explored the galaxy, those early core worlds that founded it remained its chief systems, the wealthiest and most politically powerful in the galaxy, which profited greatly from the colonization of the Slice and other regions. Their region of space became known as the Arrowhead, the Inner Core, with Coruscant itself at its tip. Most of the Arrowhead had been pretty thoroughly explored before the founding of the Republic, and all the remaining unexplored corners of the region were charted and settled by 22,000 BBY. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Arrowhead had been explored down to the most insignificant uninhabited systems. The whole region was densely populated, with even the least populous Arrowhead sectors having an average population of 1 billion people per inhabited world, while a few had average populations of 500 billion people per inhabited world. Alongside this vast population, the Arrowhead had enormous wealth and a stranglehold on many of the galaxy's trade routes, making it the most strategically important part of the galaxy. The Arrowhead was the hub of culture, technology, finance, education, and fine art in the galaxy, insulated from economic crises and most wars by its wealth, political power, and location. Before discussing the systems of this region, let's quickly talk about the hyperspace routes that ran through it. All 5 of the galaxy's most important hyperspace routes started in or passed through the core worlds, and 3 of those 5 ran through the Arrowhead. The Polemian Trade Route and the Corellian Run, which defined the borders of the Arrowhead and were early avenues of expansion for the Republic, met at Coruscant, the starting point for both routes. The section of these routes that ran through the Arrowhead had their own names. The Inner Polemian was known as the Axis, while the stretch of the Corellian Run between Coruscant and Corellia was known as the Spin. The Hydian Way also passed through the Arrowhead, crossing the Polemian at Brental 4 and then running parallel to the Corellian Run out into the Slice. These 3 super hyper routes formed the backbone of the Arrowhead, but they weren't the only major routes in the region. There was also the Koros Trunk Line, which ran from Coruscant to the Empress Teta system in the deep core, and the Agricultural Circuit, which ran from Zorth on the Corellian Run into the sectors west of Coruscant, crossing the Koros Trunk Line as it did. The Commodore Run and the Trellin Trade Route, which started at Brental 4 and Trellin respectively, ran from the Arrowhead into the Slice, intersecting with the Hydian Way at their coreward ends. We're going to examine the Arrowhead in 3 parts based on the 3 main hyperspace routes through the region, and we'll start at the north end with the systems and sectors along the Polemian Trade Route. We'll begin with what may well have been the most important sector in the galaxy, the Koruska sector, also known as Sector 0, home to the galactic capital itself. Coruscant, the capital of the galaxy and birthplace of the Republic, needs no introduction. Situated at the endpoints of the Polemian Trade Route and the Corellian Run, a key location that made Coruscant the wealthiest and most populous planet in the galaxy, this planet was one of many ecumenopolies in the core, covered from pole to pole by the urban sprawl of a galactic city. This vast metropolis was built in layers, with 5,127 levels total. At the top lived the galaxy's elite, the wealthiest beings in the galaxy, a mix of politicians, businessmen, and other powerful people who dwelled in gleaming skyscrapers on the surface. On the levels below them, the rest of the planet's population lived in destitution, with beings of countless species eking out a living in the permanently twilit streets of the Coruscant underworld. With an estimated population of 3 trillion beings, Coruscant was the most populous place in the galaxy, and it was home to some of the Republic's most important institutions, among them the Galactic Senate, the Galactic Courts of Justice, and the headquarters for many other Republic bureaus and departments. The Jedi Temple, the home base of the Jedi Order, was also located on Coruscant for a significant portion of its history, built atop an ancient sacred mountain. The planet was also home to vast industrial sectors, Republic military bases, and commercial districts. The Coruscant system also contained many other inhabited worlds, moons, and space stations. Countless people lived in Coruscant's numerous orbital stations, which ranged from shipping hubs to orbital mirrors that warmed up the originally chilly planet. Coruscant had 4 moons: Centax 1, Centax 2, Centax 3, and Hesperidium. Centax 1 and Centax 2 were both used as staging grounds by the GAR during the Clone Wars, and Supreme Chancellor Palpatine had secret cloning centers built on Centax 2, while Hesperidium was a highly exclusive resort moon. Many of the moons of the system's outer planets were used to store waste from Galactic City, while others, including the frozen moon of Improco, had resorts and colonies. There was also another habitable terrestrial planet in the system, Vandor 3. the next planet sunward from Coruscant. Vandor 3 was lightly populated, at least relative to Coruscant. It was an agricultural world for the most part, supplying Coruscant with much of its food imports, and during the Clone Wars, it also hosted a military training facility. Coruscant shared the Coruscant sector, as well as the Coruscant subsector, with a number of other significant worlds. We'll talk about some of them in other region videos, since the Coruscant sector sat at the junction of 3 regions. The only other Coruscant sector worlds relevant for us today are the lesser urban planet Utrost and the icy, rarely visited resort world Dunedin, which was home to a few private retreats. The Coruscant sector also contained the massive nebula, which was located close to Coruscant. The planet Bessemir was also located close to Coruscant, though not within the Coruscant sector. The New Republic used this planet as a staging ground for its final assault on Imperial-held Coruscant. From Coruscant, the Polemian trade route struck out rimward, passing next through the Alsaka sector, which contained the core founder, Alsakan. If you've seen our series on the history of the Republic, you might remember Alsakan as Coruscant's rival in the Alsakan conflicts, a series of 17 low-key civil wars that split the Republic throughout the Old Republic era. Alsakan was another wealthy Ukamenopolis with a population of 1 trillion beings, and throughout the Republic's history, it was the political, economic, and cultural rival of Coruscant with which it jockeyed for control over the Republic. While Coruscant was democratic, Alsakan was aristocratic, ruled by a monarchy. While Coruscant favored a centralized republic, Alsakan favored a loose federation. And while Coruscant spread Galactic Basic and the Aurebesh script, Alsakan insisted on speaking the ancient language of High Galactic. Alsakan once dominated the largely human civilizations of the Polemian trade route, which the Alsakani called the Axis, as well as the northern dependencies and northern reaches of the slice. By the time of the Clone Wars though, Alsakan's influence had greatly diminished, though its cultural impact endured. After the end of the Alsakan conflict, Coruscant became the undisputed center of the Republic, and Alsakan, once its rival, became just another core world. 2 systems lay between Alsakan and Coruscant. The Kess system, which Alsakan and Coruscant filled with hyperspace mines during the Alsakan conflict, and an adjacent system that once contained Belgoth's beacon, an ancient ceremonial hyperspace beacon. Rimward of Alsakan, either on or closely adjacent to the Polemian, was Polemia itself, an industrial world famed for its shipwrights and orbital shipyards. Polemia's shipwrights built the scout ship that charted the Polemian trade route, which was named after Polemia in their honor. Polemia was also a major shipbuilder for the Republic Navy during the Taiwanese War. The next major stop on the Polemian trade route from Alsakan was Grismalt, another heavily populated core world with a proud ancient culture. Grismalt was ruled by a monarchy and had a thriving shipbuilding industry. It colonized many planets further out in the galaxy, among them Naboo. Further down the axis was the Azure sector, the former territory of the ancient Azure Imperium, a small empire ruled by the worlds of the Axum system. This system contained 2 heavily populated industrial worlds, Axum and Anaxis. Axum was the sector capital and the more politically powerful of the 2, and its industrial output was much greater as well. Axum was heavily urbanized and incredibly wealthy, and the Axumites were quite proud of their world's history and prestige. Anaxis, meanwhile, was a fortress world steeped in naval tradition. Once, it had been the chief shipyard of the Azure Imperium, the last line of defense between Axum and its enemies, and it played a similar role for the Republic. It was not only one of the Republic Navy's most important shipyards, but the home of the Republic Naval College and the Republic Navy's top officers. Anaxis was the greatest bastion of the Republic Navy, and its fleets had kept enemy invaders from reaching Coruscant so many times that it was known as the Defender of the Core. As a result of its long history of naval tradition, Anaxis eventually became more prestigious than Axum, with the famed Anaxis Citadel being renowned across the galaxy as the symbol of the Republic Navy. Anaxis, like Axum, was heavily urbanized, but it was considered a green Coruscant, which is to say an ecumenopolis with lots of large parks and green spaces spread throughout to counterbalance the urban sprawl. Many Anaxi came from families with millennia-long histories of service in the Republic Navy, and all of the most prominent Navy families had estates on Anaxis, among them the Holts, Bangiers, Ozuls, and Wormices. Further down the Polemian from the Axum system was the Vento system shipyards, another major shipbuilder for the Republic Navy. And past the Vento system were the worlds of the Ringali Shell. This was a small but densely populated knot of systems located in the tangled heart of the Ringali Nebula, which looped around the Polemian where it intersected the Hidean Way. The Ringali Shell was divided between the Bormia and Darpa sectors, each of which contained 3 ancient human colonies along the Polemian, all of them wealthy core founders of the Republic. The coremost of these was Korulag in the Bormia sector, a planet of urban sprawl and bamboo forests, a wealthy trade world with a population of 15 billion. Numerous galaxy-spanning conglomerates had headquarters on Korulag, and CNR Fleet Systems had an R&D facility on the planet during the Imperial era. Korulag was also home of the Korulag Academy, a prestigious military academy that trained recruits for service in the Republic Army. Next was Chandrila, a rural but wealthy planet, an agricultural world with wide tracts of unspoiled woodlands and scant industry. Chandrila's natural beauty was said to rival Alderaan's, and the planet was known for its democratic values and strong protections for freedom of speech. In later eras, it was also famous as the homeworld of Republic Senator and New Republic Chief of State, Mon Mothma. At the junction of the Polemian trade route, Hidean Way, and Commodore Run was Brental 4, a trade world that took full advantage of its location at the most important hyperspace crossroads in the galaxy. Brental's polar regions were dominated by massive ice caps, while its equator consisted mostly of deserts and warm oceans. The regions between were mountainous and heavily urbanized, packed with cities, warehouses, spaceports, and other facilities for use in the planet's powerful shipping industry. Brental's small, habitable region was densely populated, with roughly 65 billion people crowded into its packed canyon cities. The planet's wealth mostly came from shipping along the trade routes Brental controlled, and its economy was dominated by the Brental houses, a collection of noble families that acted as trade guilds. Brental 4 was also a major smuggling hub with a thriving criminal underworld. Further down the Polemian was SLS in the Darpa sector, the sector capital and former throne world of the Esselian Empire. A rugged, mountainous world with a ring system and dense atmosphere, SLS was, like the other Ringali shell worlds, populous, wealthy, and urbanized, the headquarters for several major corporations. Rimward of SLS was Rinal, once an Esselian colony, a chilly world renowned for its doctors and medical technology. Much of the planet was covered by glaciers, while the temperate parts were a mix of forests and urban zones. Rinal's medical facilities were some of the best in the galaxy. The planet was considered a medical wonderworld, according to the Essential Atlas. It was also a producer of cybernetics and pharmaceuticals, as well as textiles. During the time of the Republic, Rinal also hosted a Jedi chapter house. The most remote of the Ringali shell worlds was Raltir, a major financial hub. Raltir's surface was a mix of urban zones, towering mountain ranges, and coastal wetlands, and it had significant influence over the economies of worlds all along the Polemian trade route. The planet had a staggering 28 moons, whose tidal forces counterbalanced each other, leaving Raltir's oceans with no noticeable tides. Raltir was one of the most prominent financial worlds in the galaxy, rivaling Argao and Munilinst, and it was also renowned as a good place to make poor financial decisions. Past Raltir, the Polemian run plunged into the colonies. Before we move on to discussing the worlds of the Hidean Way and its surroundings, however, there are a few more planets closely adjacent to the Polemian that are worth a mention. There was Albicus, a Jedi-friendly Ithorian-dominated world close to Raltir, Mielenova, the home of the Pan-Galactic Arts Conservatory, the industrial planet Koran, and Eragorm, another financial world that did bookkeeping work for the Senate. Now to move on to the systems of the Hydian Way and its tributaries, beginning with the worlds of the Commonor Run, a branch of the Hydian that ran from Brental IV to Commonor in the colonies. Along the way, it passed Tapasi, originally a Kuwadi colony that became a commercial hub and core founder with colonies of its own. Tapasi was the home of the House of Tagi, a wealthy, noble family that controlled Tagi Co., a major galaxy-spanning megacorporation. Past Tapasi, the Commonor Run continued to Kamas, a verdant jungle world that was the homeworld of the Kamasi, a peaceful species who were renowned for their openness and commitment to diplomacy. It was said that the first Jedi learned morality from the Kamasi, and regardless of whether or not that was true, the Kamasi had a close relationship with the Jedi Order, which had a temple on Kamas. Past Kamas, the Commonor Run entered the Alderaan sector, passing by Alderaan, a beautiful world that was considered the soul of the Republic. Alderaan was a world of unparalleled natural beauty, which its people cherished and sought to preserve. Their scattered cities were monuments to the creativity of sentient beings, while the countryside was kept pristine, a haunt of artists and philosophers. Alderaan was ruled by a monarch, though it also had a strong democratic tradition, and it was known for its open ports and its people's love of art, learning, and peace. Alderaan shared its system with the smaller terrestrial planet Delaya, a more urbanized world to which Alderaan outsourced most of its industry. Before heading out into the colonies, the Commonor Run also passed Tayed Khant, a gas giant packed with floating platform settlements, most of which were given over to ranches and farms, which produced foodstuffs for the core. Just off the Commonor Run was Crumboa, the homeworld of the Crumboan species. Coreward of the Commonor Run, the Hydian Way struck south through the Arrowhead, passing many key systems on its way to the colonies. The first notable planet it passed after Brental was Skako, an ecomonopolis that served as the homeworld of the Skakoans and the headquarters of the Techno Union. Skako had a high-pressure, methane-based atmosphere that beings of most species needed a pressure suit to survive. Conversely, the native Skakoans required pressure suits to survive on most other planets, without which their bodies would explode. Consequently, few Skakoans ever left their homeworld, which was entirely covered with city blocks, plus a few tracts of sprawling vine fields, which were prowled by multi-legged Octoptaras. Skako was a major manufacturer for the Techno Union, primarily producing droids, as well as the conglomerate's headquarters. Past Skako, the Hydian Way entered the Demophon sector, which contained the small agro-world Malglare and Demophon itself, a mech world covered with deserts, mines, and vast industrial facilities, which made it one of the Arrowhead's main industrial worlds. Demophon's environment was highly unstable, not because of industrial activity, but because of its star, which was in the final stages of its life during the Age of the Republic. During the Galactic Civil War, the star went supernova, destroying Demophon entirely. A more stable and much wealthier industrial world, Fedal was located further down the Hydian Way, as was Rul, a mining world and penal colony which funneled resources to mech worlds further up the Hydian. Past Rul, the Trellin trade route broke off from the Hydian Way at Trellin, a trade hub and fortress world that controlled traffic between the core worlds and the colonies. Past Trellin, the Hydian Way ran to Mawan, a warm planet of gleaming cities and fungal rainforests, which had a strict caste system before a civil war in the Republic's final years allowed members of the lower caste to gain political power. In 25 BBY, Mawan's capital city was nearly destroyed by a chemical weapon, which the Jedi Master Yaddle sacrificed her life to stop. Past Mawan was Barabu, home to the Institute for Sentient Studies, and Balasa, a peaceful and mostly rural world known for its textiles. Further rimward was Jassiprus, homeworld of the Geetsly species, and Voktunma, a largely unspoiled world of forests and mountains home to a busy starport. Past Voktunma, the Hydian Way struck out into the colonies. A number of other noteworthy systems were located rimward of the Hydian Way, near the border between the core and colonies. Right along this border, located on a branch of the main Hydian Way, was the Kuat sector, which contained the planet Kuat, a core founder and one of the galaxy's most prestigious shipyard worlds. The Kuat system was littered with shipyards, the largest of which was a vast orbital ring around Kuat itself. All of these were operated by Kuat Drive Yards, the largest military shipbuilder in the galaxy, which designed and built capital ships for the Republic Navy. KDY operated at the behest of the Kuat family, the leaders of the planet's powerful aristocracy, which had ruled over the planet since before the Republic. Kuat itself was a beautiful world of rolling plains and the occasional forest, dotted with magnificent cities and the occasional industrial zone. Kuat was one of the first human colonies established in the pre-Republic era, and the Kuati had established many sleeper ship colonies of their own, spreading humans to Axum, Tapasi, and Humbarine, all of which would become powerful core founders in their own right. South of Kuat was the planet Priya, an ocean world dotted with islands that were home to the Priapulans, a spacefaring species of gastropods known for their pacifism. Further south was the Humbarine sector, also known as the Humbarine Rule, a knot of sterile manufacturing worlds that were ruled by the Humbarine, an eco-monopolist and core founder on the Trellin trade route. Humbarine was both an industrial kingpin and a commercial hub, densely populated and home to a Republic Navy shipyard. During the Old Republic era, Humbarine sponsored extensive exploration efforts in the slice, establishing Balmorra and Comenor as its colonies. And during the Clone Wars, it was a Republic fortress world. This status ultimately didn't do it any favors, however, as Humbarine was targeted by General Grievous during Operation Dirge's Lance in 20 BBY. Grievous ordered his fleet to conduct an hour-long orbital bombardment of Humbarine, turning its planet-wide city into molten slag and killing hundreds of billions of people. South of Humbarine was Sayugi, the home of a cult of force-sensitive assassins known as the Sayugi Dervishes. Apart from their main base on Sayugi, the Dervishes also had a fortress on the largely barren planet Recopia, a nearby world of sulfuric oceans and poisonous clouds. Also located adjacent to the Hydian Way was Marfa, an agri-world home to a Jedi agricultural core facility, Sadaran, a former ordnance/regional depot, Trantor, another eco-monopolist, and the volcanic planet Magma. Between the Hydian Way and the Corellian Run was a slightly less populous strip of the Arrowhead that nonetheless contained a number of noteworthy planets. Close to Coruscant were Basilisk and Voltar, two planets that had been prominent Republic worlds before they were destroyed during the Old Republic era. Basilisk was the homeworld of the Basiliskans, a formidable lizard-like species that created many fearsome weapons of war, among them the Basilisk war droids. Their homeworld was originally lush and humid, and for millennia the Basiliskans were prominent members of the Republic. But during the Mandalorian Crusades, the Mandalorians targeted Basilisk and laid waste to it, claiming the Basilisk war droids for their own, and enslaving the Basiliskans, who degenerated over the course of millennia, becoming non-sentient Lagatos war dragons. As Basilisk fell to the Mandalorian invaders, the Basiliskans poisoned their own planet in an act of scorched earth defiance. By the time of the Clone Wars, it was completely barren. Voltar, meanwhile, was believed to have been an artificial world, a creation of the ancient Celestials who built the whole Voltar system and left one of their world pullers, the Cosmic Turbine, in a stable orbit within it. In 4250 BBY, this machine was commandeered by the Dark Jedi of the Third Great Schism, who hoped to weaponize the celestial machines in the Voltar system to destroy the Jedi Order. Instead, they accidentally destroyed the entire system in the Voltar Cataclysm, destroying the system's star, all its planets, the Cosmic Turbine, and themselves. The remains of the Voltar system became the Voltar Nebula. South of the Voltan Nebula was Palawa, which was the birthplace of two Force-sensitive traditions, the Paladins of the Chatos Academy and the followers of Palawa. The Paladins were one of many Force-based religions from which the Jedi Order drew its traditions, while the followers were enemies of the Jedi, as well as the creators of the martial art Teras Kasi. South of Palawa was the volcanic planet Sarapin, a desolate but extremely important planet. Energy collectors stationed across Sarapin siphoned the planet's geothermal energy into energy storage units, which were exported all across the core worlds to satisfy the vast energy needs of the city planets. Further south was the Liamertu system, which contained Rosha, the home of the human-like Roshans, and Samaria, a desert planet whose people were heavily dependent on technology. There was also Jumara, the homeworld of the Jumerians, and Karnak Alpha, home to the Karnak Alphans. Between Samaria and Rokopia was another of the core world's greatest shipbuilders, Rendili. Rendili was home to vast shipyards as well as the ancient shipbuilding firm Rendili Star Drive and the less prominent companies Golan Arms, Rendili Hyperworks, and Rendili Vangevalis Drive Yards, which operated satellite shipyards all over the galaxy. With a population of 600 billion, Rendili was a heavily populated world, its surface covered by a mix of oceans, open country, and dense urban industrial zones. Rendili was renowned for its well-equipped home defense fleet, and for most of the Republic's history, Rendili Star Drive built most of the Republic's capital ships. It was only in the Republic's final centuries that Rendili Star Drive was eclipsed by KDY, which partially contributed to Rendili's brief secession during the Clone Wars. On the coreward side of the Arrowhead were the worlds of the Corellian Run, the last region we'll be discussing today. The leg of the Corellian Run that led between Coruscant and Corellia, also known as the Spin, was culturally and economically dominated by Coruscant, and during the Old Republic era, several of its worlds served as headquarters for the Grand Companies, a cartel of powerful megacorporations that oversaw the colonization and exploitation of the slice. Though the age of the Grand Companies was long over by the Republic's final years, many powerful corporations still had headquarters on the Spin, even at the time of the Clone Wars. Ixtlar, the next major stop down the Corellian Run from Coruscant, was typical of this kind of Spin world. Ixtlar was a powerful, incredibly wealthy trade world, an ecomonopolis that had profited immensely from the colonization of the slice. The planet's vast, heavily populated cities were covered in holographic advertisements, and virtually any form of merchandise could be acquired in the planet's sprawling commercial districts, as Ixtlar saw extensive trade from all corners of the galaxy. Rhydoni Prime, located much further down the Spin in the Namarine system, was a similar case. The headquarters of Rhydoni Products, Rhydoni Prime was a wealthy trade world with very few poor inhabitants. Not every corporate stronghold on the Spin was urbanized, however. Zorth was an agri-world owned by Salish AG, while Rehemsa was headquarters of the agricultural company Rehemsa Consumables, as well as the location of a Republic refugee camp during the Sith Wars. Also located on the Spin was Leria Cursil, the temperate, little-populated homeworld of the Life-Bearers, sometimes called Life Witches. These were human women who had the rare ability to share their life forces with a partner for 3 to 5 years, following which their partner would die, and according to the laws of Leria Cursil, the Life-Bearer would inherit all their possessions. Life-Bearers usually bonded with older beings who weren't long for the world, giving them a few extra years of life before they passed. If they bonded with a younger partner, they would die prematurely. Due to this, the Life-Bearers were widely mistrusted, seen as life-stealing witches, but the Life-Bearers prided themselves on bringing comfort and extended life to the old and dying. During the Separatist Crisis, Leria Kelsil was one of the few core worlds that opened its borders to refugees, though with strict conditions. They only accepted wealthy, single men. Of course, the most prominent Corellian-run world, after Coruscant itself, was Corellia, which lay on the southern border of the Arrowhead. Corellia lay at the heart of the Corellian sector, a wealthy and heavily urbanized region of space ruled by Corellia and dominated by that planet's vibrant culture. The Corellian sector straddled the border between the Arrowhead and the Southern Core, and most of the systems within it were Corellian colonies, among them the agri-world Socoria, the minor spaceport Truzdan, as well as Krain, Zyquine II, Aurea, and Vagran. The Corellian sector contained the homeworlds of several non-human species, among them Govaya, Froz, Altawa, and the jungle planet New Plimpto, the homeworlds of the Govians, Frozians, Korrigots, and Nasaurians respectively. Several older, non-Corellian human colonies that had since come under Corellian domination were located in the Corellian sector as well, among them the near Equimonopolis Dorsus, the ancient trade world Corphi, and Nubia, an unspoiled, mostly rural world that housed several minor shipyards and the headquarters of several powerful corporations, among them Nubia Star Drives, an industrial automaton. Nubia was renowned for its natural beauty, as well as for the beautiful designs of Nubian starships, which were most famously used by the Naboo. Then, there was the Corellia system itself. Like the Voltar system, the Corellia system was artificial, having been created by the Celestials in prehistory, and as a consequence, it contained 5 habitable planets in near-perfect circular orbits: Corellia, Dral, Talus, Tralus, and Salonia. Salonia and Dral each had their own native species, the hardy, musterline Salonians and the shorter, heavyset Dral. Dral was a bit of a backwater, while Salonia hosted orbital shipyards and the Salonians' vast underground cities. Talus and Tralus were twin planets, both colonized by Corellians, Salonians, and Dral, which orbited Centerpoint Station, the world puller the Celestials used to create the Corellian system, which itself had a significant population. Of course, the heart of the system was Corellia itself, one of the wealthiest and most politically powerful core worlds. A core founder of the Republic with an infamous independent streak, Corellia controlled most of the outer Corellian run, as well as the Corellian trade spine, which struck out into the southern core from Corellia. Corellia was a varied, pleasant world home to the Corellians, a population of humans believed to have been brought to the planet by the Celestials in prehistory. The Corellians were proud, ambitious, and free-spirited, and they explored and colonized a large swath of the galaxy, making Corellia very wealthy. During the Alsacan conflicts, Corellia typically remained neutral, breaking off from the Republic along with its colonies to form the Corellian hegemony whenever conflict arose. Corellia was a prominent trade world, and it also hosted the orbital shipyards of the Corellian Engineering Corporation, one of the biggest shipbuilders in the galaxy. Apart from foodstuffs and booze, starships were Corellia's biggest export, and many of the galaxy's spaces and free traders were Corellian, as were many smugglers. Corellia was originally ruled by a hereditary monarchy, but a few centuries before the Clone Wars, it became a democratic system headed by a constitutional monarch, which, in turn, was replaced by a corporate oligarchy ruled by the Diktat. The Corellian Merchants Guild, one of the galaxy's most prominent spaces organizations, was based on Corellia and restricted membership to Corellian sector citizens. Corellia had very strong influence in the southern regions in the galaxy, but within the Arrowhead, its influence was much more limited, confined mostly to the Corellian sector. Moving on from the Corellian run itself, let's talk about the last stretch of the Arrowhead, the narrow strip of core world systems, coreward of the spin, between the Corellian run and the borders of the deep core. Most of these were concentrated near Coruscant, with many on or around the most stable hyperspace route into the deep core, the Koros trunk line, which formed the western border of the Arrowhead. This ancient route, which was kept stable by S-thread boosters, ran from Coruscant to the deep core's Empress Teta system, passing 3 noteworthy core worlds as it went. First, there was Phoros, the home of the Phoros shipyards, the primary shipyards of the Republic Navy during the Old Republic era. Phoros itself was largely unremarkable, little more than a mine used to supply raw material to the orbiting shipyards, which once housed and serviced a large portion of the Republic fleet. After the Rusan Reformation, however, Phoros fell into decline, and the Republic sold the shipyards to the Techno-Union. Just past Phoros was Caecilius, a core founder of the Republic and former regional power player, the home of the Pragi political dynasty. Caecilius has been described as the gentrified suburb to Coruscant's big city, ruled by great houses and still maintaining a degree of political power, despite having lost most of its ancient colonies. Forost was originally a Caecili colony, as were the moons of Jon Sior and the last major stop on the Koros trunk line, the agro-world Ruan. Ruan, along with the aforementioned Corellian-run agro-world Zorth, was among 18 agro-worlds in the northern core controlled by the Salish Agricultural Corporation, Coruscant's primary food supplier. Most of these agro-worlds were located on a route known as the Ag Circuit, which ran from Zorth on the Corellian run to Cal Seti in another part of the core, intersecting the Koros trunk line at Ruan. In the Arrowhead, the Ag Circuit also passed the Salish-owned agro-worlds Eulant and Broest, as well as Argau, an unrelated banking world. The entirety of Argau was owned and administered by the Bank of Argau, a powerful subsidiary of the intergalactic banking clan. Most of the planet was urbanized, but Argau did also have expanses of countryside which were ecologically diverse and mostly maintained as nature preserves. Argau had abundant reserves of valuable metals in its crust, which the Bank of Argau used to back currencies, leading to its enormous wealth and economic power. Argau had an enormous private military, which regularly played out war games in the planetary capital, New Escro, to deter invaders. Despite being a banking clan world, Argau remained loyal to the Republic during the Clone Wars, at least ostensibly, though there were tensions between the Republic and the planet's IGBC administrators. Just off the Ag Circuit were a few mining worlds, namely the mining colony Golud Minor and the asteroid mines of the Kardua Belt, as well as Spira, the capital of the Lighten sector. Spira was a resort world dominated by warm oceans and chains of tropical islands home to the galaxy's rich and famous, the beaches of which were visited by tourists from all over the core. South of Spira, between the Spin and the Deep Core, were a few final noteworthy planets. One was Ator, an urban planet on the edge of the Deep Core, whose people settled Tatooine and the worlds of the Arcanus sector. This planet was technically just within the borders of the Deep Core, but it was classified as part of the core worlds and the Arrowhead for cultural reasons. Colomus was the low-gravity homeworld of the hyper-intelligent Colomai, a flat, muddy planet covered with forests and the high-tech cities built by Colomai's participatory democracy, which rose above the forests on stilts. The Colomai were largely isolationist and kept to themselves on Colomus, living peaceful lives unburdened by the troubles of less intelligent beings. Lastly, there was Leto, a legendary planet that, by the time of the Clone Wars, had long been lost. Leto was an obscure world, more suited to the Deep Core than the Arrowhead, known only as the ancient stronghold of the first Jedi to break away from the Order to study the dark side. These ancient Dark Jedi, led by Zendor and his lover, Arden Lin, organized into the Legions of Leto, and they established their stronghold and Darkside Academy on the planet. The Legions were ultimately crushed by the Jedi Knights at the end of the First Great Schism in 24,500 BBY, following which their academy was destroyed. Leto was abandoned, and before long, it was lost to history. During the Clone Wars, almost the entirety of the Arrowhead was under firm Republic control, with the only exceptions being a few small separatist enclaves. The region was divided between the oversectors of 4 Republic sector armies, all of which had their headquarters and numerous important military strongholds in the Arrowhead. This region was strategically vital to the Republic, the location of its capital, and many of its most important shipyards and economic strongholds. Consequently, this was the best defended region of Loyalist space, insulated for the most part from the ravages of the Clone Wars, though not completely. Sector 0 and the heart of the Arrowhead was defended by the 1st Sector Army, nicknamed Azure Hammer Command, which had its headquarters on Anaxis, the Republic military's greatest stronghold. Azure Hammer was primarily charged with protecting Coruscant and the worlds of the Axis, as well as keeping an eye on the IGBC's Argau branch and blockading the separatist enclaves of Skako and Forost. The 1st Army made extensive use of the shipyards and naval academy on Anaxis, as well as military facilities on Coruscant and its moons, Vandor 3 and Korulag. Adjacent to Azure Hammer's oversector was the territory of Steel Blade Command, the 3rd Sector Army, which was headquartered at Chandrila. Steel Blade only had a little territory inside the Arrowhead, controlling the Ringali Shell and nearby Koran. Most of Steel Blade's territory was out in the Slice and Northern Dependencies, and most of its operations took place even further out, as the 3rd Army saw use mostly as reserve command for mid-rim operations. The 4th Sector Army, also known as White Kureis Command, was a similar case to Steel Blade. The army was headquartered at Alderaan and patrolled the middle portion of the Arrowhead as part of its oversector, but its forces spent most of the Clone Wars in the Outer Rim as a reserve command. Within its Arrowhead territories, White Kureis had access to the shipyards of Kuat, which built most of the Republic Navy's capital ships, and which the 4th Army was tasked with defending against Separatist forces from nearby Nemoidia. Lastly, there was the 2nd Sector Army, Green Mantle Command, which was headquartered at Nubia. Green Mantle patrolled the southern part of the Arrowhead, and though its operations were mostly concentrated in the southern parts of its oversector, the 2nd Army did see combat within its Arrowhead territories during Operation Dirge's Lance. On top of its other duties, Green Mantle Command was tasked with keeping watch on the Corellian sector, which closed its borders just prior to the Battle of Geonosis and remained neutral in the Clone Wars. For most of the Clone Wars, there were only 2 major separatist enclaves in the Arrowhead, small regions of space around the Skako and Foros systems, both of which were key Techno-Union strongholds. Both were located in Sector 1 and blockaded by Azure Hammer Command, which kept an especially tight cordon around the shipyards of Foros, preventing it from contributing to the CIS Navy. A number of other core worlds in the Arrowhead briefly seceded at different points in the war, among them Brental 4, Esselis, Tyed Kant, and Rendili. All were very quickly retaken. Though the Arrowhead was mostly insulated from the ravages of the Clone Wars, it did see several notable battles over the course of the conflict. Early in the war, a surprise separatist strike on Sarapin caused blackouts across much of the inner core, which historians considered the moment when the Clone Wars became a reality for core welders rather than a distant crisis. In 20 BBY, the Arrowhead was attacked by the armies of General Grievous during Operation Dirge's Lance, which saw Grievous conquer 26 core worlds after breaching Republic defensive lines at Duro. Most of the systems targeted by this campaign were in the southern core, but a few were in the Arrowhead. Among them Alderaan, which was successfully defended by the Republic, Caecilius, and Humberine, which Grievous subjected to a devastating bombardment that wiped out all life on the urbanized planet. Shortly thereafter, another Separatist campaign caused chaos in Sector 0, as the Separatist Bulwark Fleet, which the Techno-Union spent the war building at Foros, broke the Foros siege and rampaged across the region, repeatedly doing battle with the Republic's Victory Fleet before being destroyed in the Battle of Anaxis. The Separatist incursions in the Arrowhead ultimately didn't last. The Republic soon mustered counterattacks, which drove Grievous and his fleet from the core. After the Bulwark Fleet's rampage, Foros was retaken by Republic forces, and Skako eventually fell as well. By the start of the Outer Rim sieges, the whole Arrowhead was under Loyalist control. At the very end of the war, General Grievous led one last Separatist fleet through the deep core to attack Coruscant, but Republic forces eventually drove him off, and the Battle of Coruscant ultimately proved to be the beginning of the end for the CIS. That brings us to the end of our tour of the Arrowhead. We hope you've enjoyed this exhaustively thorough look at the heart of the core worlds. But what do you think? Do you like these sorts of galactic videos? Which of the planets or peoples of the Arrowhead do you find the most interesting? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.